You show up before the sun rises. You stay after the lights go off. You take the shift no one else wants. You answer emails at midnight, miss birthdays, skip meals. You say yes even when you're exhausted. You follow the rules, you double-check your work, and you take pride in being the reliable one, the one who never complains. You've been told that this is how success is built, brick by brick, hour by hour, sacrifice by sacrifice. They carry the weight of cities on their backs quietly and visibly. The janitor who sweeps the floor long after everyone's gone. The bus driver who greets strangers at dawn though no one ever remembers his name. The warehouse worker who lifts until their spine protests and then lifts again. The construction crew that builds skylines they'll never afford to live in. They are the ones who rise before the world wakes the first heartbeat of a system that barely acknowledges them. And yet, despite the blisters, the skipped lunches, the long commutes, their reward is often a paycheck that barely outruns the bills. They don't lack discipline. They don't lack integrity. What they lack is leverage. While they master reliability, someone else masters visibility. While they work with their hands, someone else works with perception. And in today's economy, perception often pays better than perspiration. The nurse who calmly saves lives under pressure earns less than the influencer teaching confidence hacks in front of a rented sports car. The delivery driver who races against traffic to meet a deadline is left behind by someone who built a course selling advice they've never lived. The harder the labor it seems, the cheaper the reward. Why does this pattern persist? Why do the people who keep the world moving struggle just to stay afloat? The uncomfortable answer: because the system doesn't reward necessity. It rewards positioning. It doesn't pay based on contribution. It pays based on control. Not control over yourself, but control over outcomes, over assets, over attention. You can serve society with every breath and still be treated as replaceable. Because the truth is, the world doesn't pay for sweat, it pays for strategy. And so you look around and ask, how did they move so fast? How did they rise so high with so little substance? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the better question is, who taught me to believe that merit alone was enough? From the moment we're old enough to understand words, we're told a story. A story about how the world works. Work hard, play fair, and everything will fall into place. Do the right thing, stay humble. Follow the rules, and in time the universe will recognize your effort. It's the narrative sewn into school lessons, bedtime stories, and graduation speeches. The idea that the world is a level playing field, that life is a fair equation effort in reward out. Simple, clean, comforting. But stories aren't always true. And this one was built not just to inspire, but to pacify. Because if you believe that suffering automatically leads to reward, you won't question the suffering. If you trust the system will eventually repay you, you'll keep feeding it even when it starves you. There's a name for this belief: the just world fallacy. The illusion that the universe operates like a moral accountant, logging every sacrifice, balancing every good deed, and distributing justice accordingly. But life doesn't function like that. It's not a math equation. It's a marketplace. And the currency isn't virtue, it's value. Not the kind of value measured by effort, but by visibility, by influence, by control. Think about it. The teacher shaping future generations, earns less than the marketer selling soda. The farmer growing your food struggles more than the consultant selling strategies to sell things no one needs. These aren't exceptions, they're patterns. Because the system you live in doesn't reward what's necessary, it rewards what's profitable. This doesn't mean hard work is meaningless. It means that hard work alone is not enough, especially when the game is rigged in favor of those who start with the rules in their hands. If you're playing chess without realizing the board is tilted, you'll mistake slipping pieces for your own fault. That's the cruel genius of the myth. It doesn't just mislead, it keeps you obedient. It keeps you grinding, hopeful, tired, and silent. It praises your loyalty, not to uplift you, but to keep you from noticing how little it pays. It teaches you to endure instead of ask, to wait instead of question, to sacrifice without expecting a return, and to feel guilty if you ever do. But ask yourself this: if hard work truly leads to success, why are so many of the hardest workers, the most exhausted, the most overlooked, the most replaceable? Why does the system praise their sacrifice, then funnel the reward to someone else? Why are the people who follow the rules often left behind, while those who bend them seem to leap ahead? Because the system wasn't built to reward virtue, it was built to extract from it moral labor. The kind that's honest, selfless, obedient, is glorified precisely because it's exploitable. It's dependable. It doesn't talk back. It doesn't negotiate. It shows up on time and doesn't ask for more. And that's the lie we're rarely told out loud, that your goodness is not a guarantee. That your work ethic, your sacrifice, your loyalty, they might make you respected, but they won't always make you successful. Because in this world, the outcome isn't decided by how much you give. It's decided by who holds the power to take. Nietzsche didn't see morality as a set of universal truths. He saw it as a tool, one forged in the fires of power struggles. In his eyes, what we call good and evil were never objective absolutes. They were inventions, weapons, social technologies crafted to either defend power or to survive its absence. He described two distinct moral systems: master morality and slave morality. Master morality is born from strength. It begins with affirmation. I am powerful. I am capable. I shape the world, therefore, what I do is good. In this worldview, good is what expresses vitality, ambition, courage, will, creativity. It honors excellence, not obedience. It celebrates those who act with agency, who declare their own values and stand by them even when the world resists. Slave morality, by contrast, is reactive. It doesn't define good by what it is. It defines good by what it isn't. It says, power is dangerous. Strength is corrupt. Ambition is selfish. It glorifies humility because it cannot afford pride. It praises obedience because resistance would be punished. In a world where the weak cannot win by force, they win by redefining the rules. To Nietzsche, slave morality was not born of virtue, it was born of fear. It was a strategy. When you cannot fight the lion, you convince the herd that running is noble. When you cannot lead, you must lead. You preach that following is holy. When you are oppressed, you reframe your pain as purity. And over time, that reframing becomes tradition. Then doctrine, then truth. And people forget that these values weren't always sacred. They were invented, taught, repeated until no one dared question them. But Nietzsche did. He looked at societies that praised submission, sacrifice, and meekness, and asked, who benefits from this moral code? Who profits when the masses believe that suffering is sacred? His answer was simple. The powerful do. Because a person who believes their suffering is holy is easier to control. A worker who equates obedience with virtue is easier to exploit. And a population trained to see rebellion as evil will never challenge their rulers, even when those rulers fail them. That's why Nietzsche saw moral labor, the kind rooted in sacrifice, humility, self-denial, not as noble, but as a trap. A beautifully decorated prison. A mindset that turns your chains into badges of honor. Think of the phrases we use. Hard work builds character. Good things come to those who wait. Just keep your head down and do the right thing. These aren't universal truths. They're echoes of slave morality. They're stories we've inherited to keep us functioning within a machine that needs loyalty more than freedom. This isn't to say all humility is weakness or that kindness is worthless, but Nietzsche challenges us to ask, is your morality a choice or a coping mechanism? Are your beliefs empowering you or sedating you? Because morality without awareness can become a leash, a moral code that discourages self-assertion, ambition, or anger, especially in the face of injustice, isn't liberating, it's paralyzing. And here's the subtle danger. Slave morality doesn't look like slavery. It looks like virtue. It wears the mask of goodness. It tells you that the more you endure, the more worthy you are. It convinces you that to serve is noble, even if no one ever serves you in return. That to give endlessly is divine, even as you collapse from exhaustion. Nietzsche wasn't condemning ethics. He was warning us about ethics that rob us of power, that teach us to be useful before we learn to be free, that tell us to sacrifice first and speak last. He wanted us to remember that values are not holy by default. They are created, and they can be remade. The most dangerous prisons are not the ones with bars. They're the ones built inside your mind. And the harshest wardens aren't tyrants. They're the beliefs you never thought to question. If Nietzsche tore down the illusion of moral labor, the Stoics offer a different way to rebuild what comes after. Where Nietzsche asks us to question who wrote the rules, Stoicism asks us to question our reaction to them. Both philosophies reject blind submission. But one pushes outward toward power. The other turns inward toward mastery of the self. Marcus Aurelius Emperor, in Stoic philosopher, once wrote, "You can commit injustice by doing nothing." It's a striking reminder that passivity in the face of an unjust world is not virtue, it's complicity. Yet unlike Nietzsche, Marcus doesn't call for rebellion. He calls for resilience. He does not demand that the world be fair. He demands that you remain fair regardless of what the world does. Where Nietzsche sees morality as a weapon, forged by the powerful Stoicism, sees virtue as an armor forged within. The Stoic does not expect the world to hand him justice. He expects the world to challenge him and prepares accordingly. He trains his mind to withstand chaos, not to avoid it. He does not measure worth by status or power, but by how well one lives according to reason, courage, temperance, and justice. So, while Nietzsche urges us to break the chains, Stoicism teaches us how to carry them with grace until the moment we no longer must. It's tempting to imagine these two worldviews in conflict: Nietzsche, the iconoclast tearing down altars, and the Stoics calmly meditating in the ruins. But perhaps they aren't enemies. Perhaps they're part of a larger dialogue, a tension between rebellion and discipline, between creating new values and perfecting one's character. Both reject obedience for its own sake. Both understand that morality can be manipulated, but where Nietzsche sees submission as a sickness to be eradicated, the Stoic sees it as a misunderstanding, an error in where we place control. A Stoic doesn't believe in suffering for approval. He believes in enduring for growth. He doesn't deny pain, but refuses to be ruled by it. To suffer is not to fail. It is to be human. What matters is how we respond. Not how loud we cry, but how clearly we act. The Stoic path, then, is not to escape hardship, but to transform it. It's to face the unjust boss, the broken system, the missed promotion, and say, I will not be less because of this. I will not bend my values just to be seen. My strength is not in how I conquer others, but in how I govern myself. That's the quiet rebellion of Stoicism. It doesn't overthrow the world, it outlasts it. Waking up doesn't always feel like an epiphany. Sometimes it feels like exhaustion, like staring at the clock after another 12-hour shift and realizing you're no closer to the life you imagined, like noticing the praise you get for your sacrifice never comes with real reward, like watching your loyalty get applauded while someone else's strategy gets promoted. It begins with a feeling not of rebellion, but of quiet clarity, a crack in the glass. You begin to see that maybe the system isn't broken. Maybe it was never built for you. Maybe it was built to extract from you, to harvest your labor, your time, your discipline, not to empower you, but to preserve itself. Because a system designed to reward obedience doesn't malfunction when the obedient go unrewarded. That's how it maintains control. The painful part of awakening is realizing that the rules you followed so faithfully weren't created with your freedom in mind. They were designed with efficiency in mind. Predictability. Compliance. People like you, honest, dependable, principled, make the system run, but rarely do they run the system. And so the awakening doesn't begin with rage. It begins with a question, a simple one: who benefits from my consistency? Who profits from my silence? Who rises because I stay where I am? Suddenly, the stories you were told about how virtue always wins, about how goodness is its own reward, begin to sound less like truth and more like training. You see that what you called values may have been expectations, that what you called loyalty may have been programming. You realize the machine doesn't need you to think it needs you to repeat, to sacrifice without resistance, to give without condition. You start noticing patterns, how the hardest workers are often the least protected, how the most generous employees are the easiest to overwork, how those who never say no are the ones asked to do more and more until there's nothing left of them to give. You notice how your virtue is used not as a strength, but as a mechanism of control. That's the turning point, when praise starts to feel like sedation, when hard work feels less like purpose and more like pacification. When the ladder you've been climbing begins to look like a treadmill. And that's when the questions sharpen. What am I actually building? Who owns what I'm creating? Why does sacrifice always flow one way? These questions are dangerous, not because they're radical, but because they're clear. And clarity threatens systems that rely on confusion. The more you see, the less you comply. Not out of defiance, but because you finally understand what the game really is. The system doesn't punish you for being good. It punishes you for noticing that being good isn't enough. There comes a moment when you realize the rules you were taught won't take you where you want to go. That being good, loyal, and selfless may earn you respect, but not necessarily results. And in that moment, you're faced with a choice: abandon your values or upgrade them. That's the shift. Not to trade morality for manipulation, but to evolve from blind goodness into strategic integrity. Because there's a difference between kindness and obedience. One is chosen, the other is conditioned. And if your goodness only exists within the lines someone else drew, is it really yours? The world doesn't just need more good people. It needs good people who understand power, who know when to say yes and when to walk away, who know that boundaries are not barriers, but definitions of self-respect, who realize that generosity without discernment becomes depletion. That silence isn't always virtue, it can be vulnerability. This is where strategic kindness comes in. Strategic kindness isn't fake. It's not charm wrapped in calculation. It's intentional. It means choosing your yeses with clarity and your nos with courage. It's understanding that your time, your attention, your energy, these are currencies. And if you keep spending them without strategy, you'll end up bankrupt in all the ways that matter most. You don't owe everyone your sacrifice. Not every crisis deserves your involvement. Not every job deserves your loyalty. Sometimes the most moral thing you can do is walk away from the place that rewards your silence more than your insight. But to do that, you need to know what you're building. And more importantly, who you're becoming. Because power, real power, doesn't come from domination. It comes from authorship. The ability to make decisions rooted in your values, not someone else's expectations. The strength to say, this is what I stand for. This is what I won't allow. This is how I choose to live. And that strength is not loud. It's quiet, steady, deliberate. You see it in the teacher who sets boundaries with grace, in the artist who says no to a contract that compromises her voice, in the father who teaches his kids that love includes limits, in the woman who leaves a job that drains her soul not out of anger but out of wisdom. The shift isn't about becoming selfish. It's about becoming sovereign, reclaiming the space between action and reaction, between pressure and principle. It's about choosing your response not from fear, not from guilt, but from grounded clarity. And this kind of strength, it's invisible to those who still think goodness is about pleasing. But it radiates in those who've learned that kindness without strength is just permission for the world to take. So the real question isn't, will you still be good? It's, will you be good and no longer powerless? There comes a point in every awakening where realization must become response. Awareness alone is not transformation. Knowing the system is rigged is not the same as choosing to stop playing by its rules. At some point, clarity must turn into courage. That's the moment when you stop waiting for a seat at the table and decide to build your own. Nietzsche called this type of person the Übermensch, the overman, the one who rises above imposed morality, not by rejecting values, but by creating their own. Not a tyrant, not a narcissist, but a fully self-authored individual. Someone who doesn't wait for validation, who doesn't ask for permission to live with purpose. They don't measure themselves by how well they fit in, but by how boldly they express what they believe. The Übermensch doesn't climb the corporate ladder hoping someone will notice. He builds a new structure. He writes new rules. He takes the raw material of disappointment and forges it into direction. This isn't about rebellion for the sake of drama. It's about creation. The shift from being a cog to becoming a craftsman. From waiting to be chosen to choosing yourself. You've seen this spirit before in artists who self-publish instead of waiting for a contract, in entrepreneurs who launch ideas no one asked for, but everyone needed, in thinkers who speak truth without waiting for approval. Think about the startup founder who got rejected by every investor only to build a business that changed an industry. Or the writer who was told their voice didn't fit the market, but found an audience anyway. These people didn't succeed because the system welcomed them. They succeeded because they stopped asking to be let in. That's the action. Not just defiance, but authorship. Not just escape, but construction. The willingness to take ownership of your values, your choices, your voice no longer shaped by what the world permits, but by what your purpose demands. It means walking away from roles that shrink you, leaving positions that reward obedience over originality. It means realizing that sometimes the system doesn't change. When you wait, it only changes when you step out of it and create something better. And no, it's not easy. Creating your own path means risk. It means starting small, often alone. It means enduring the doubt of others and the louder doubts within yourself. But what's the alternative? To spend a lifetime hoping someone finally sees your worth, or to decide that your worth was never theirs to recognize. Because here's the truth. Those who rise are not always the most talented or the most moral. They are the ones who stopped living on borrowed definitions of success. They chose not to be managed. They chose to lead even if it meant leading only themselves at first. That is the essence of the Übermensch, not dominance, but design. Not arrogance, but authorship. A life lived on your own terms, directed not by reward, but by responsibility. So now you know. Hard work alone is not the path. Loyalty without leverage is not a strategy. And goodness, if unguarded, can become a gift the world forgets to repay. So the question returns, but it sounds different now. If hard work is not enough, what will you choose to do next? Will you keep waiting, hoping that someone someday will notice what you've been giving all along? Or will you begin to notice it yourself? This isn't a call to rebellion. It's a call to responsibility. The kind of responsibility that doesn't beg to be seen but dares to see clearly. That doesn't chase applause but acts with awareness. Because awakening isn't about rejecting the world, it's about refusing to be ruled by illusions. To live with virtue is not to become invisible. To serve with heart is not to vanish into the system. You are not meant to disappear inside someone else's plan. You are meant to live by design your design, not in opposition to the world, but in alignment with what truly matters. So don't settle for being the good worker who waits. Be the conscious builder who knows what they're building and why. Because power isn't always about control over others. Sometimes it's the quiet ability to walk away from what no longer honors who you are. And here's the truth: your integrity doesn't need validation, but your vision, it needs protection. Not from others, but from the version of you who's still afraid to claim it. If you're ready to explore what it means to live ethically without being manipulated to be kind, without being used to think deeply, without being drowned in noise, you're in the right place. Not because we promise praise, but because we offer perspective.